Hello everyone, welcome back to Vine Street Storytime. My name is Miss Olivas, and today we have some sad news. Jane Goodall has passed away. So to honor her work, we are going to be reading Women in Science, Jane Goodall, written by Alex Wolff, illustrated by Isabel Lindy. Introduction. Throughout history, there have always been women scientists, but it wasn't until the 20th century that women like Jane Goodall began to have the professional opportunity to take trips abroad to study the natural world up close and make new scientific discoveries about animals. Jane Goodall is regarded as the world's leading expert on chimpanzees. Her discoveries revolutionized our understanding of these remarkable animals, yet she achieved this without any formal training. What she did have was a passion for animals and the patience to study them over long periods of time in their natural habitat. She also had the determination to overcome the skepticism of a scientific community that did not always approve of her methods. This book tells Jane's story, her childhood in England, her groundbreaking work in Africa, and her role as a globe-trotting ambassador of the conservation movement. Important places in Jane's life. Jane Goodall grew up in Bournemouth, England. Jane studied at Cambridge University. Jane accompanied Louis and Mary Leakey on a fossil hunting expedition on Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania. Jane studied the chimpanzees at Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania. Jane traveled by boat to Kenya. Growing up, Jane Goodall was born in London in 1934. Her father Mortimer was a well-known racing driver, and her mother Margaret was an author. Jane's sister Judith was born 4 years later. When Jane was 1 year old, her father gave her a toy chimpanzee called Jubilee. It was named after a real baby chimp who had recently been born in the London Zoo. Jubilee sparked Jane's love of animals, which would last her whole life. Dreaming of Africa. Jane did well at school, but she couldn't afford to go to college. She worked for a few years as a secretary, but still dreamed about going to Africa and working with animals. Dad goes to war. In 1939, World War II broke out and Jane's father left home to join the army. The following year, Jane went with her father to live with her grandmother and aunts in the seaside town of Bournemouth, hiding with chickens. When she was 5, Jane hid for hours in a hen house because she wanted to see where eggs came from. She had no idea that her family was searching for her. Going to Africa. In 1956, when Jane was 22, she received an invitation from a former school friend to come and stay on her family's farm in Kenya, East Africa. After saving hard for the fare, Jane took a boat there in April 1957. Seeing Africa and its wildlife was a dream come true for her. She met lots of interesting people, including the famous anthropologist, Dr. Louise Leakey. Fossil hunting expedition. Dr. Leakey hired Jane as his secretary. He believed that Jane had the makings of a very good scientist. He invited her to join him and his anthropologist wife, Mary Leakey, on a fossil hunt in Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania. Dr. Louis Leakey. Dr. Leakey's discoveries in Olduvai Gorge and elsewhere showed that humans evolved in Africa. He was looking for someone to study chimpanzees for clues to the behavior of earlier humans. He thought Jane might be the perfect person for the role. The chimps of Gombe. In 1960, Dr. Leakey raised funds so that Jane could study the chimpanzee community in Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania. As a young woman, Jane wasn't allowed to live there alone, so her mother accompanied her for the first few months. Peculiar white ape. Jane observed the chimps each day. She tried to get them to accept her, but every time she moved closer to them, they ran away. Jane was patient, though, and gradually they started to accept her. She later said they thought of her as a peculiar white ape. One day, a few weeks after Jane began her study, a chimp with gray whiskers came into her camp. She named him David Graybeard, who was the first chimp who let her come close. Soon, she gave all the chimps names to make them easier to identify. Scientists later criticized her for this. Usually, researchers gave animals unique numbers, not names. And we have Gigi, Frodo, Passion, Mr. McGregor, David Graybeard, Mike, Fifi, Flo, Goliath, Humphrey. Learning about chimp behavior. Through patient observation, Jane built a picture of the way chimps behaved both on their own and as a group. She found that each chimp had its own personality and that they were capable of strong emotions such as joy or sorrow, affection and status. Jane observed behavior such as hugs, kisses, pats on the back, and tickling. She believed these were evidence of affection and mutual support. She also noticed that some chimps had a lower or higher status than others in the community. They showed this through grooming, food sharing, power struggles, and fighting. A common ancestor. Jane was the first person to discover that chimps could exhibit complex personalities and behaviors. She observed chimps using their wits or behaving deviously to get what they wanted. This suggested that many behaviors we think of as humans may have been inherited from the common ancestors we share with the chimps. Primate researchers. Besides Jane, Dr. Leakey recruited 2 other female primate researchers to study the great apes in their natural habitat. Deanne Fossey studied gorillas, and Birute Galdikas researched orangutans. Some amazing discoveries. Dr. Leakey had helped Jane raise money for her chimp study. She was able to use her time observing the chimpanzees to make several important discoveries about their behavior. Discovery number 1. Hunters. On October 30, 1960, Jane saw David Graybeard sitting in a tree gnawing on the carcass of a piglet. This overturned the common belief at this time that chimps ate only fruit and leaves. Jane wondered if he had found the carcass. Later, she witnessed chimps hunting. Discovery number 2, using tools. A few days later, Jane saw David again. With Goliath, she watched them strip twigs of their leaves, then poke them into a termite mound to fish for termites. The chimps were making and using tools. Until then, experts thought that only humans had such skills. Discovery number 3, chimp mothers. Jane noticed that female chimps were not born with the knowledge of how to care for their young. They were taught parenting skills by their own mothers. Flo, a good mother, could be tolerant but also impose discipline when needed. Passion, on the other hand, was a poor mother who would frequently ignore her children. Flo's daughter Fifi was also a good mother who had many children of her own. Passion's children had few offspring. The world reacts. Jane wrote up her findings and published them in a paper. In April 1962, she gave a presentation to the Zoological Society of London. Many in the audience were not impressed. They didn't think Jane was a proper scientist because she hadn't been to college and had no training. They didn't believe chimps had emotions and personalities and criticized her for giving them names rather than numbers. Dr. Jane Goodall. Going to college. Jane realized that she would only be taken seriously by the scientific community if she had an academic qualification. In 1962, Dr. Leakey managed to secure her a place at Newnham College, Cambridge, to study for a PhD in ethology, animal behavior. She was one of very few people ever to be admitted to study for a PhD at Cambridge University without already having a degree. Dr. Jane Goodall. Jane's supervisor for her PhD was the experienced ethologist Robert Hind. He visited her at the Gombe and told her he learned more in those 2 weeks than all his previous work with animals. Robert, in turn, helped Jane think like a scientist and showed her new ways of recording data. In 1966, Jane was awarded her PhD. She became Dr. Goodall. Photographing the chimps. In 1962, the National Geographic Society offered Jane a grant to continue her work at Gombe. They asked for photos of the chimp behavior she had described. Hugo van Lawick. Jane sent photos, but National Geographic said the quality wasn't good enough, so Jane reluctantly agreed for a professional photographer to be sent at Gombe. In August 1962, National Geographic sent 25-year-old wildlife photographer Hugo van Lawick. He and Jane got along well. He was also accepted by the chimps and soon captured photographic evidence of chimp tool making and use and other chimp behaviors, including nest building and social hierarchy. In Jane's world, Jane wrote words to go with Hugo's photos, and National Geographic magazine published the story in August 1963. Hugo and Jane in love. During their time working together, Jane and Hugo found that they had much in common. Soon they fell in love. They got married in March 1964, and in 1967 they had a son, Hugo Eric Louise, known to the family and friends as Grub. Finding success. Jane's National Geographic article, My Life Among Wild Chimpanzees, was a big success. Jane was happy because it raised public awareness of her work, but she wished there had been fewer photos of her in it and more of the chimps. The editors explained to Jane that her story was partly what made the article so interesting. The run-through. In February 1964, National Geographic asked Jane to give a major presentation of her work in Washington, D.C. The organizers asked Jane to do a run-through. Reluctantly, she did so, and it wasn't great. She heard them whispering, "Shall we cancel? It's going to be a disaster." The presentation. When she was in front of the audience with Hugo's footage playing behind, Jane gave a brilliant talk. She spoke about the need to protect chimps and prevent them from being shot or sold to circuses. She said, "David Greybeard has put his complete trust in man. Shall we fail him?" She pleaded for these amazing creatures to be allowed to live free in their natural habitat. "We must protect the chimps." Jane makes a movie. After Jane's successful presentation, National Geographic decided to make a film about her called Miss Goodall and the Wild Chimpanzees. To make the film, Jane had to reenact a lot of scenes from her early years in Gombe so Hugo could capture them. The film, featuring commentary by the famous actor and director Orson Welles, came out in 1965. It was viewed by 25 million people in North America alone and brought Jane and her work to worldwide attention. The Great Chimp War. During her time studying the chimps of Gombe, Jane had found them to be similar in many ways to human beings, but thought them rather nicer in their behavior. She was forced to change her view in 1974 after witnessing a brutal war break out in the chimp community. North and South. The Gombe chimps broke into two groups. The Kasakela in the north numbered 20 adults, and the Kahama in the south consisted of 10 adults. The war lasted 4 years and ended in victory for the Kasakela, who killed most of the Kahama and took over their territory. Shocking. Jane had seen chimps hunting prey before, and she knew they could be ruthless. Still, the war shocked and upset her because it was the first time she had witnessed chimps turning on each other, including former friends. Remarriage. Over the years, Jane and Hugo grew apart. In 1974, they got divorced but remained good friends. By this time, Grub was living with his grandmother in Bournemouth. In 1975, Jane married Derek Bryson. As director of Tanzania's National Park, Derek was able to protect Jane's research project. Sadly, Derek died of cancer in 1980. Conservation work. In 1977, Jane founded the Jane Goodall Institute to promote the study and conservation of chimpanzees in the wild. Today, JGI works with the local communities to prevent habitat destructions by protecting forests and promoting sustainable farming methods. Goodbye, Gombe. In November 1986, at a conference in Chicago, Jane was stunned to hear about all the habitat destruction going on across Africa and the threat it posed for wildlife. She knew then that she had to say goodbye to Gombe and dedicate herself to the conservation of wildlife in general. Roots and shoots. Jane believed that the best hope for conserving the world's wildlife was to get young people and communities involved, so she launched Roots and Shoots in Tanzania in 1991 and TACARE around Lake Tanganyika in 1994. These programs help people of all ages identify problems affecting humans, animals, and the environment in their local community. It then encourages them to develop projects and campaigns to try and solve these problems. Today, Roots and Shoots has thousands of groups operating in countries all over the world. We need to plan for the future. Every individual can make a difference. All this hard work will be worth it. A tireless campaigner. Jane Goodall never stops campaigning. She travels an average of 300 days a year, giving speeches about the threats facing wildlife and urging people to help make the world a better place. She was named UN Messenger of Peace in 2002. Books, films, and awards. Jane has written many books, including In the Shadow of Man and Chimpanzees of Gombe. She has been the subject of more than 40 films, and she has received international awards for her work. She has come a long way since those days in Bournemouth.